I'm glad that you're still with me, and I hope you've made good progress on your situation analysis. Because remember, you start by describing your situation in relation to your challenge and focusing on elements of your situation that are going to help you answer your question. Um, you identify, you describe your data sources, you're clear about your limitations, but now it's about the findings. So once you have put the pieces together, the setup is you're figuring out your question, your challenge, making sure you describe your situation, and then the data sources. And then there's a stage in which you're actually going to analyze all that. And what we want you to put into the situation analysis are the findings from that analysis. So there is very much an intermediate step here. And that before you get to part 4, so between parts 2 and 3 and part 4, that is where the analysis takes place. That is where you look at your situation, you look at your question, you look at your data sources, you put all that together and you say, okay, what can I learn here? So your key findings are really answering the question, what have I learned? The way we've put this is, what is the most likely answer to your question based on the data? Okay? So write down the answer. You had a clear question, hopefully. You may need to refine or revise your question as you do the analysis, but then you write down the answer. So that can be short to say, well, based on my situation, based on my data sources, based on the analysis, so looking at all that together and figuring out what you pull out, what you can learn from it, you write down the answer. That's step 1. But then the key step is actually defending your findings. So it's not only saying, I think this is what's right. You actually have to demonstrate, connect the dots between your situation, what you learned from your data sources, what you learned from your situation, putting that together, and then convince others based on what you see in the data. So here you can see, so no findings, that's a 0, and then 4 is excellent summary of findings that answer the question with clear explanation of limitations. So it's a summary of the findings, but it's the justification of the findings that actually matters. It's how compelling a case have you built for your findings. So write down the most likely answer. Explain why this answer is a credible one. Describe, so you use the different data sources. What is the story being told by these different data sources? Individually, and remember, looking at them together is key. So you recognize that you and others and the data sources all are going to have limitations, biases, be grounded in certain assumptions. So that is not wrong in and of itself. It's only wrong if you do not acknowledge or recognize these limitations and how they may be affecting the findings, what you think you found, or lead you to change what you initially think as you think through what these limitations, biases, assumptions mean. There may be an issue there. So someone else with the same data should arrive at the same answer as you when trying to answer the same question. Now, many of you will start out feeling with a perception that you already know the answer to your question. So I would encourage you to be very wary of that. That, in fact, means that you have assumptions that could be quite misleading as you work, especially through the root cause analysis, asking why 5 times about what you initially think is the cause of the problem or of your situation or your challenge. You will see that you discover hidden things. That is the point of situation analysis. It's not only about listing what you know and drawing the conclusion that you think is right. It is questioning the conclusion that you think is right, because that is an assumption. So ask yourself, why do I think this way? Does the data actually support my position? Do others think the same way? Now, the opinions of others may or may not be valuable. In fact, whatever you do, you should rely on evidence. Personal opinion may be grounded in experience, could be in some ways considered a kind of evidence, but certainly not the best kind of evidence, and certainly the kind of evidence that should be questioned. Now, when it comes to your personal experience, There's a lot of value there. I've said this in previous videos. Trust what you know because you work there every day, but question it as well. Because in many cases, if you have been doing things in a certain way for a long time, the situation may have changed. There may be changes in the communities that you serve. There may be other changes in the broader context. And if you keep doing the same thing, but everything else around you has changed, the consequences could be different. You could be contributing to the situation that you've described as a challenge. Now, this is why this question of comparing different data sources. Now, there are formal techniques, one of them is called triangulation. There's very good guidance from WHO and CDC and UNICEF on it. If you know how to use those techniques, great. But if you do not, do what you can to compare the data sources. See what each one is saying. Where are the contradictions? What are they saying? So that is, in order to reach your findings and actually determine what are you going to report as your key findings here in your situation analysis, it's extremely important to compare different data sources and interpret what you see. So here you can see the questions. What are the common trends and patterns, if any, across data sources? Are there contradictions? If so, do they matter? What might explain the trends or contradictions you see in the data? Can you write out possible explanations for why the data are what they are? Have you considered all possible explanations before coming to your conclusions? So you go back to your question and connect the dots. Do the data allow you to make a convincing argument on what the answer is? All right. And so if the data do allow you to do that, pick the explanation that best applies to your situation. Convince others of your conclusion. And if the data are inconclusive, present the answer as different scenarios and explain your reasoning. So you may not be able to reach a definitive answer to your question. In that case, you do the best that you can to summarize what you're able to determine and also the sort of open questions. And probably when you're looking at describing what next steps should be taken, some of those steps should be about improving the quality of the answer that you're able to bring, and maybe additional data sources, additional steps. That's why we include that next step section. But right now you're dealing with your key findings. Now, here you can see that it's about explaining ways to gather missing or additional evidence. So you want to clearly identify the limitations with respect to what you know and do not know. And then look at how assumptions limit, if they do, your analysis and interpretation of the data. So explain what important information you're missing at this stage. And then in the next steps, you'll get to say how you could gather this missing information and how it will help you answer the question. You can already mention it in the key findings just to, but really it's in the next steps that you'll be describing that. And then given situation analysis is not something you do only once. You have a time-bound exercise in which in a limited time, you're building an initial picture. You may not be able to find everything you want. There may be lots of gaps or holes in your key findings, and that is okay because you explain the significance of what you have found, recognize the limitations, and then in the next steps, you'll be able to say, well, here are the things that I could or should do in order to take this forward. Now, at the peer review stage, we'll have reviewers asking questions such as these. Are the author's findings and interpretation of the data credible and compelling? Are the arguments used convincing and rooted in data? Has the author discussed how assumptions and potential biases might have affected the findings? So if there is overinterpretation or overgeneralization, how can the author revise their interpretation, and what type of evidence might be used to strengthen the findings? So all of these considerations will be, things that your reviewers will consider. So I urge you to, as you're writing your key findings, to also consider these same questions and to refer back to the ratings up here to see, well, where between the 0 and the 4, what is the current level of work? So you can use this for self-evaluation, review the steps here. But again, if you're short on time, make sure you get to the questions that are in this yellow box. Don't write them in the yellow box, write it beneath. Some of you have, I've seen in some of the work that's already been submitted, have made that mistake. But really the main point is, tell us what you found, not only what you thought you knew. If you've confirmed that, great. Convince us that what you thought you knew is correct and is now supported by what you know about your situation and by what the different data sources have told you. So the key findings is the most important section in the situation analysis. You'll see the next section, the next steps, is the most important section to take you forward, to go from, okay, now I know and I can see things that I did not see or know before. I also better understand what I do not know and understand my own assumptions. This is to help you figure out what to do next. That is the overarching aim of situation analysis in our context, in the context of this exercise.